Now, I want to make sure that we get a chance to get through the rest of these arguments that Hales has, because remember, Hales started out by saying the world is going to say it was all about sex. It wasn't just about sex. But his next point makes an important concession.
Now, the third reason is the one we hear about all the time. In fact, some people want it to be the only reason, and that is to multiply and replenish the earth. It's in verse 63. And sexuality is expected in these plural marriages that Joseph Smith was practicing and that others were engaging in Nauvoo and in Utah. And that's the third reason.
Hales, to his credit, is honest, because I think most people looking and trying to defend any of these other religious predators would say the same thing. It's not just about sex for Koresh. He had to bring the elders into pass so the book of Revelation prophecy could be fulfilled. Yes, sex was part of that because you had to give birth to the elders, but that's not the main point. So don't criticize. Don't think that David Koresh just wanted sex. But there's a little bit of a competing thing here, because if it was about sex, why does Joseph Smith not have any children from these plural marriages? I don't know. How do you make sense of this particular argument?
I think that we have not tested every human being on the earth to see whether they're descended from Joseph yet. I think that there's also this idea that there have been other women that are not documented as his plural wife, because the church comes out and says, yeah, we know, but not for sure. There's that possibility. And when it comes to multiplying and replenishing the earth, you have to take your mind out of the idea that polygamy is wrong and put yourself back into that framework, which is really hard to do. Put yourself back in the framework of thinking that polygamy is right and these are the reasons for it. And of course, that makes sense. They have to have sex. Mm-hmm. Oh, but it's like a whiplash. Oh, no, he didn't. It's not proven that he did, but except that's what it was supposed to be for.
Why is that even an argument?
Yeah, doesn't work.
There's so
for
many
me.
reasons. You say Helen Mar Kimball and people, he didn't have sex. We can't prove that there was any sex with Helen Mar Kimball, the 14-year-old. It's like, why is that even an argument? Because sex would have been allowed religiously, according to Joseph's doctrine. And future prophets carrying the same prophetic mantle also engaged in sex for which there is progeny. So it doesn't do anything. That should not even, if they wanted to be internally consistent, they would have said, yeah, maybe he did have sex with Helen Mar Kimball. What of it? It was sanctioned by God. It was approved. It wasn't adultery. Even the parents gave consent. So what's the big deal? Why are you worried about it? But they know that will not fly. They know that grinds against the conscience of anyone looking at that, because they know that when you make that concession, there's no longer any way to draw any line between Joseph Smith, the prophet, and any of these other religious charlatans who preyed upon women and children in their congregations using divine command, using divine sanction.
Yeah, that is the line that is drawn in the sand, and that's why they can't concede to it. Yeah, unfortunately, that's, I think, just one of those reasons, like in the book of Ghosts of Polygamy, when she talks about the reasons why polygamy was instigated, and then she refutes every single one of them, and that is exactly correct. If we've gone down that path before, people have gone down the path of if it was supposed to be to multiply and replenish, and you even talked about that today, how come Joseph didn't have any kids? We don't know if he had any kids. This is so undocumented. If documents were burned, how do we know? We don't know, you know?
Not only that, but the first counselor to the presidency up until 1842 was an abortionist, John C. Bennett. And we know he was an abortionist because Joseph and Hiram themselves accused him of being that. Now, they only accused him of being that once he was their enemy, but that means they knew he was while he was their friend, which means that they could have called on his services. It's not just Sarah Pratt, the apostate, saying that John C. Bennett was an abortionist. It's actually Joseph and Hiram themselves accusing him of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that they accused him. But one other thing about Helen Mar is, if we are going to listen to the voices of these women, including Helen Mar's friend, who comes out to say that Helen Mar was lamenting being married to Joseph, but because it's a bad thing, now we're going to dismiss it because that makes it look like a bad thing. When her friend says, Helen said, if I would have known the extent of this marriage, I would never have done it. And she says it in a way that implies that Joseph was intimate with her. Do you know what I'm talking about, that one? Yeah. So I don't think we have the option to pick and choose. And I think that's where the argument of if it makes Joseph look good, then it's true. And if it makes him look bad, then it's not. And that's how I think the Denver Snuffer movement, throwing every single one of the witnesses of the Temple Lot case under the bus and saying they're all lying. I don't agree with that. I'm tired of having voices shut down. And I think that now we are unleashing that, and we need to keep doing that. And the more voices we hear, the better picture we're going to get.
Yeah. No, here. Okay, so Brian Hales is conceding that it was at least partly about sex. We've discussed in our last discussion where in these narcissistic paradigms that you see in other religious predators, it wasn't necessarily about sex so much as it may have been about control. If you look at the story of David Koresh, he originally entered into a relationship with the leader of the congregation that he took control over after she died. And that relationship was partially to acquire the control of it. And so all of these other things play into his use of relationships to maintain control over the group. There's another example with Julius Schachnow that we haven't brought him up yet. This is the sinful Messiah. Let's see if we can learn anything from his story.
Now that he's declared himself the sinful Messiah, Julius demands a new and even more extreme test of faith from his followers.
Anybody that was really following and believing in Julius would be asked to make that sacrifice of your wife, basically to have sex with Julius.
This is in line with Hale's prior point about the Abrahamic test.
In the teachings of the works, a year of faithfully following the teachings of the works leader, Brother Julius, Bill Rocap's devotion is tested when he learns that he must hand over his wife to the man he believes to be the Messiah.
What do you mean you have to sleep with someone to have them close to God? I don't think no matter what moral circles you come from, that would be a difficult thing to handle.
Now, again, that request right there parallels Joseph Smith's request to Heber Kimball that he give his wife to him. And it was a test in that case.
Julius even had a name for it. He called it the special work. That by letting them sleep with him, he was giving them the opportunity to be intimate with God.
Bill and his wife are instructed to abide by this special work as the ultimate way to prove their loyalty to Julius.
My wife loved Julius from the moment she met him. She was hook, line, and sinker. This is a special man. But to some people, that was traumatic.
If anyone questioned what Julius was doing, he shut them down.
He would say, I am a mirror of what's in your heart. So if right now you are accusing me of lust, it's lust in you. Remember, I'm the sinful Messiah. I'm showing you to yourself. Can you take it?
To demonstrate his own commitment to the special work, Julius hands over his wife, Joanne, to his chief apostle, Paul Sweetman, father of 4, whose wife died several years earlier.
And he does this demonstration of anointing these two to be together. I'm so busy with my ministry, I'm turning over the Spirit to Paul. From that.
So here we have just another religious leader who's using tests of authority, tests of loyalty to expand the moral parameters of what is just and right before God and society, who's now starting to issue tacit threats to anyone that would criticize him or push back against him. There's one other aspect that I want to get into with him before we go to the cleansing.
Meanwhile, Julius uses his position of power to take advantage of female followers in new ways, and all in the name of biblical prophecy.
Julius had what he called his concubines, young women that he just chose to have sex with. The idea of it was the Bible verse that says, 7 women shall take hold of 1 man, meaning when the end times come, there's going to be so many men wiped out that there's going to be 7 women to 1 man.
Lisa is about 15 years old when she realizes she may be forced to fulfill her duty to Julius when he corners her in the hallway after one of his marathon Bible meetings.
He was like holding my hand and like playing with the palm of my hand. I still remember his breath. I remember the cologne he used to wear. He said, "You're becoming a beautiful woman of God." And he leans in close again and he says, "Have you felt the Spirit of God yet?" And then he goes, "You want to feel it where it counts?" I told my mother about it, and I think she believed it's an honor to be chosen by God. If you're having intercourse with someone that you consider God, it's supposed to be a transcendent, spiritual, divine experience. And I felt guilty about being repulsed because you're supposed to think of it as such a good thing to be chosen.
As she tries to come to terms with what might be required of her, Lisa watches in horror one day.
We have another person claiming to be connected to God, to be God himself, who's using the piety and the desire to be connected to God in the minds of their followers to get them to go along with his predations. Is it any different if a person claims to be God or claims to be the mouthpiece of God, using that same God authority to impose these new moral standards on the followers? That's a question you have to say. Because it wasn't exactly like these other sexual predators, then it's okay that Joseph did what he did. Maybe that exclusion, that special pleading will work for some people, but I don't know if it will for everyone. And this is the final one with Shaq now that I think is telling, particularly in the instance of Helen Mar Kimball.
Is there anyone on earth who has any fear of God at all?
Since the early 1970s, Julius Shacknow has manipulated hundreds of followers in suburban Connecticut, but the full extent of his depravity doesn't come to light until 1986. A woman in her 30s files a civil suit, claiming that when she was only 15 years old, she was forced to have sex with Julius because he was a holy man.
Now it's gone beyond Julius sleeping with his followers' wives. Those were adult women. Now we're talking about sexually abusing children.
I did not know anything about Julius Shacknow or the work. I was contacted by a former member who came to me and said she had been abused and wanted to know if she had any legal remedies. It took me about 2 seconds to figure out I was dealing with evil.
What makes the allegations even more disturbing is that the victim is the daughter of Chief Apostle Paul Sweetman.
She's the daughter of Brother Julius's second in command. But even she's not safe. In fact, she's even more vulnerable because her father reveres Julius so much.
Everybody in that group believed he was God. And so imagine yourself and the most important person in your life wants you to be with him, and your parents are telling you you have to do it. Manipulation is the mildest term you can apply, being forced into having sex with this 45, 50-year-old man at the time.
So here we've got what is essentially a parallel to Helen Mar Kimball and Violet Kimball and to Heber Kimball and Violet Kimball and their daughter Helen Mar Kimball, where a religious leader is now using the same religious paradigm that he's used to prey upon other women to now prey upon the children of his followers. And the point they make here, where that young child is even more vulnerable because the people in her closest circle of trust who she would rely on to keep her safe are themselves taken in by the moral predations of this man. And that is a powerful argument and a depiction of what's being done here. The thing that, as I learned and saw more and more of these stories, and I saw that these types of behaviors and religious manipulations define what religious sexual predation is. And when I see someone claiming to be a man of God doing these things, and I realize that they have to drape themselves in a bunch of good stuff that draws people to them in order for them to effect these bad things in secret. And I realized this whole paradigm of men claiming to be men of God, saying, oh, I may have made a mistake here or there, that's all just a cover up for them to zone in on the most vulnerable people and do these things in secret. Now, keep in mind, they mentioned that he started his stuff in the early 1970s. It wasn't until 1986 that this stuff came out. That's like over a decade. Some of the other ones have taken multiple decades. Joseph Smith was only operating for 9 years in a paradigm where these things would have happened. And not only that, there was not an infrastructure in society for people to be whistleblowers. And when they were like Martha, like Nancy Rigdon, they were disparaged. And So that, to me, that just tells me not only that, but people wouldn't talk about sexual things. You even having, I think, carnal intercourse is like the closest that they ever got to that. And so if a religious predator in that time period would have done things to children, to women who were vulnerable, when they came and talked about it, they would not have been as explicit as we've heard in some of these stories. There would have been euphemism, or it would have been something that then when we listen to today's ears and sensibilities, then it just sounds like, oh, there's not much. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have a victim saying he sodomized children. We have victims saying he told me to marry him and I married him. But that's all they say, because there's this implicitness in it, in this Victorian era or wherever, where people don't talk about these things.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Do you think, because you're saying the time frame, do you think then, and then I was going to ask about this one gentleman who was the stake president at the time, and Brigham Young was sent off right before Joseph's death, and he says, I think it was Snow, but don't quote me because I can't remember names very well. And he said that Joseph came to him and told him that that polygamy was a mistake and that he was going to retract it. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I've heard that story, yeah. I don't know the name involved, but I know that's a talking point.
I'll have to look that up, because they say, oh, that's not true, and that's hearsay, and he was always anti-polygamist from the beginning. But I'm thinking, okay, here's an opportunity for Joseph Smith to not have his apostles around him, that his counselors around him, they're all gone. Here's an opportunity that if he is actually feeling bad about these choices that he's made, that he goes to the one person that would receive him, who has been against it this whole time. I think that's a plausible thing. I don't think that it should be completely dismissed. But that's just one thing, because I'm thinking, would it have gotten worse? I don't know if you're alluding to that if years went by, if things would have gotten worse, or if he would have just stopped the whole thing. No?
Maybe, I don't know. Even if these sexual predators that we're talking about, if they come clean and they say, I was doing this, but I've reformed now, I'm not going to do it anymore, do you really trust them after that? I guess Jim Baker continued to have a following after his whole thing with whoever the person he was exposed with, but I don't think people take him legitimately seriously anymore. Because there's something about moral authority that, okay, we don't expect prophets to be perfect, but we expect them not to prey upon and abuse and exploit children. That's a pretty low bar. And so as soon as somebody does that, then it's, why do I have to listen to you at all? Particularly if I've adopted this idea that I need to test everything else in my mind. If I listen to you, then you've already proven that you're going to take something reprehensible and elevate it to a divine command. Why would I even want any bit of information about anything from you in my brain that I have to weed through and figure out what's the right stuff and what's the wrong stuff? I'm better off on my own, not even having you, a proven person who has subverted something deeply morally wrong, anywhere in my orbit. And that's the struggle. I think once people get to that point, I can no longer see Joseph as a prophet. Now, any of the good things I used to see were simply the cheese, the honey, and the trap is what matters. And I don't need that trap to be anywhere near me. And
I can see in that point of view clearly. And that's why I look at people who have left very differently. I don't look at them the same way at all. I think it's only a matter of time, Jonathan, that I'll probably be excommunicated myself.
Wait, are you being vocal about your thing? Because you're anonymous now. This is good.
Yeah,
and not only that, but we've done a vocal change on you. You sound like a sweet old lady, but really you're a 50-year-old man and you sound like this. I've done some vocal manipulations, and we changed the gender just so nobody can figure out who you are.
Good. Yeah, because there are things in the policy manual right now that were just put in this last couple of months that I would fall under that category. And I see this corruption going on. I see the usurpation of power going on, and it has to do with healing. And it has to do with spiritual gifts that are given to people, men and women, and we are not allowed to use those spiritual gifts anymore. And it's pretty awful. So I'm just thinking that's my business that I'm starting right now, and it's only a matter of time till someone goes, oh my gosh, she said this, that, and the other. I was doing a gospel doctrine class, and I talked about casting out evil spirits. It was actually in the manual in the lesson. People went and reported on me.
First miracle of the dispensation was an exorcism. Totally legit.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Well,
I
just make sure that your client
base.
base is more than Mormons, because as soon as you get axed, all the Mormons will leave. But chances are, if you're doing spiritual healing as a woman, then you've already attracted unorthodox people to you anyway.